Hi, I'm Matthew Palco, a program manager in enterprise and security.
And I'm Ravi Vanapusa, a program manager in the Azure AD team.
Today we're going to provide an in-depth look into how Windows Hello for Business provisioning works.
Windows Hello, as you may know, is Microsoft's premier passwordless solution for devices where the user and device share a one-to-one relationship. Each user on the device gets their own private key that is authorized by a simple gesture, a PIN, face, or fingerprint. Every authentication with Windows Hello for Business is two factors, with one gesture being possession of the private key and the other being the gesture used to authorize it.
Whether your organization is cloud-only or on-premises, Windows Hello for Business has a deployment option for you. For cloud deployments, you can use Windows Hello for Business with Azure Active Directory joined or hybrid Azure Active Directory joined devices. Windows Hello for Business also works for pure on-prem domain joined devices.
That's right. With Windows Hello for Business, we aim to provide flexibility in deployment options so that all organizations can deploy and start on the journey to becoming passwordless. Windows Hello for Business supports two deployment models, key trust and certificate trust deployments. Matthew, can you help us understand the differences between these deployment models?
Sure. Key trust or certificate trust refer to the credential that the end user provisions and how they authenticate on premises. In both trust models, a private and public key pair will be created for the user. In the key trust deployments, the user will receive a self-signed certificate with their public key, and in the certificate trust case, the self-signed certificate is replaced by a certificate issued from your organization's public key infrastructure.
And do the different trust models affect how someone would deploy Windows Hello for Business and what scenarios are supported?
The trust type of your deployment affects both of those things. Scenarios that require a certificate like legacy applications that use certificate-based auth, client-based TLS, or remote desktop protocol will work with your certificate trust credential, but will not work with the key trust credential. One alternative, though, is that Windows Hello for Business supports importing other certificates or creation of other credentials that are protected by your existing Windows Hello for Business gestures. So you could deploy key trust and then deploy additional certificates to support the extra scenarios that you need.
You also said that this trust type decision affects how provisioning works. Can you elaborate on that?
Of course. For this, I think we should dive into the mechanics of provisioning. This can be basically broken into two phases, device registration and then provisioning of the Windows Hello for Business credential.
By device registration, do you mean joining your device to Azure AD or on-prem AD?
Yeah, that's a prerequisite for deploying Windows Hello for Business. For the sake of time, let's leave out the device registration and just focus on the Windows Hello for Business part. Windows Hello for Business provisioning can be broken down itself into a few different parts: authentication and MFA, key generation, and key registration. There are two additional phases that can occur depending on your join type and your trust type. The fourth phase, key sync, will occur for hybrid deployments, but it's not needed for Azure only or on-premise only deployments. And the fifth phase is certificate enrollment, which is only going to occur for cert trust deployments. When a user starts enrollment for a Windows Hello for Business credential, the first thing we need them to do is authenticate and prove who they are. We also want them to MFA.
That's important to remember. Windows Hello for Business is a two-factor credential, and so we do not want to provision it without the user providing multiple factors. So Matthew, can you explain how authentication differs based on the environment, whether it's on-prem only, cloud only, or hybrid?
For Azure AD only deployments, the identity provider for these devices will be Azure AD. The user will authenticate to Azure AD with an Azure AD credential, which in most cases will be their password, and complete MFA using the Azure MFA service, as shown in your slides. For on-prem only deployments, the identity provider for these devices will be ADFS. The user will authenticate to ADFS and then does MFA using the Azure MFA plugin or a third-party MFA plugin. ADFS would replace the authentication service, which is shown in the slide. For hybrid deployments, authentication and MFA can occur in a few different ways. If you have a federated environment, then your user will authenticate an MFA using ADFS, the same as in the on-prem case. If your hybrid environment does not have ADFS, then authentication and MFA will occur directly with Azure AD, just like in the Azure-only case. For hybrid and cloud-only deployments, the result of all these authentications is that the user is going to get back a token for the Azure Device Registration Service with an MFA claim that we can later use to register the Windows Hello for Business public key to the directory. In on-premises only, where ADFS was used, the device gets back an enterprise auth token.
After the device gets back the token, the user will be prompted to set their Windows Hello for Business gesture. This step is the same for every deployment model, whether it's on-premises only, cloud only, or hybrid. To improve security, the MFA lifetime during Windows Hello for Business setup is designed to be short-lived so that the intended user is setting it up. If MFA was done more than 10 minutes ago, the user will be reprompted to do MFA during Windows Hello for Business setup.
Underneath the covers, when the user is setting up their gesture, the user's Windows Hello for Business public-private key pair is going to be generated in the TPM. Once the key pair is created, the public key needs to be registered with the directory so it can be used for authentication. In the Azure-only case, the public key is sent to the Azure Device Registration Service along with the ADRS token, proving that the user authed and MFA'd before. The Azure Device Registration Service writes that key to the user object in Azure AD. All hybrid deployments are going to follow this Azure case. The key will always be written to Azure AD first. But because the key is needed in both Azure AD and in AD to support hybrid scenarios, the key will then get written back down to AD to a user attribute called the MSDS key credential link. Key writeback is handled by Azure AD Connect during the normal sync cycle. For the on-prem only case, the key needs to be registered directly with AD. In this scenario, the key registration role is handled by ADFS. The client will send the new public key to ADFS with the enterprise auth token, and ADFS will write that key to the user object. For key trust deployments, at this point, provisioning is done.
But if you're doing cert trust deployment, there's one additional thing that needs to happen, which is the certificate enrollment. The client will generate a certificate request after registering the key. This certificate request is then sent to the certificate registration authority, which usually is your ADFS. ADFS will validate the signature over the certificate request using the key that has been registered and will fulfill the request using your on-premises certificate authority. In cases where the device is Azure AD joined and enrolled into Intune, the certificate can also be deployed via Intune using SCEP and NDS. Once the certificate is enrolled on the device, Windows Hello provisioning is complete.
That's basically it for provisioning. Remember, in both cases, the core steps are authenticate and MFA, key generation, key registration, and then the optional key sync and certificate enrollment steps. For more information on provisioning and for understanding all the infrastructure needed to deploy, we recommend taking a look at our documentation and deployment guides at aka.ms/WHFB.
Thanks for joining us. Watch our next video covering authentication with Windows Hello for Business.